Welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you being with us always. Appreciate your time. And what we're trying to do is help you in your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, even as we are trying to walk with Jesus in intimate fellowship as well. We're all on level ground here at the foot of the cross. None of us have any right to throw any stones at each other. We're here as sinners in need of salvation. We are here as spiritually diseased people in need of the great physician. So our focus is not on the mistakes and the errors of our neighbor. Our focus is on the help that Jesus provides. And that's who we need to be talking about. We need to spend less time talking about us and more time talking about him, because he is what it is all about. He is the religion. Now I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about house churches, because a lot of the things that we have said, I think, have ignited a lot of interest in that approach to Christianity. And there are people who wonder, can you really do that? Can you really just start having church? And the answer is yes, you can. You do not need any sanction. You don't need to be ordained by any man-made denomination. In fact, regardless of what else can be said about denominations, and much good that they do, and I know that there are great Christian people in them, but the institutions themselves, the denominations themselves, are entirely man-made. Jesus did not start a single one of them. I've said that before. I will continue to say it, which means they are irrelevant, which means you don't have to have anything to do with them. You can ignore them completely. So if you are attending a group that happens to be a part of a denomination and it's Christ-focused, then, that's your business. There are no set laws about how all this has to be done. But one thing that can be done, and people need to understand this because they've been so burned by this denominational approach, is that you can have church anywhere. When you have two people who love Jesus and are focused on Jesus and focused on serving Jesus, that are meeting together regularly, you have church. There are no special days in the New Testament. There are no set times that these assemblies have to occur, and that goes against so much of what we've been taught. I know that because of the approach that denominations take, which again is not necessarily wrong in and of itself. But if you get to thinking that's the only way it can be done, then it certainly can be wrong. House churches are far more biblical than any other kind of churches, because that's the kind that the apostles set up. When the church began, they met in homes, and they were spread out all over cities. And when you read about, for example, the churches of Galatia, those were house churches meeting in that Galatian region. It wasn't one church meeting in one building together. That may have happened at times. There's no evidence that it did. But even if it did happen that way at times, it was primarily small groups meeting throughout cities. And when they appointed leaders, for example, like in Titus 1 and verse 5, there came a time where there needed to be mature men overseeing the flock, in the sense of helping them grow in their relationship with Jesus, not lording it over them or being in charge like you see in denominations today, but being men of wisdom that people could go to and find help. So when it came time to appoint them, you remember what Paul told Titus in Titus 1 and verse 5, I left you in Crete so that you should set in order the things that are lacking and appoint elders in every city. And there were mature men called elders or bishops or presbyters or shepherds. They had different names that they went by, different titles, if you will. But they all emphasized basically the same thing, that these were older, wiser men who were more experienced in the faith, and they were there to guide the newcomers, the people who were less mature in the faith. It's very, very simple. I mean, it makes perfect sense the way that they did it. But these elders were over these cities because they had house churches all around them. And we don't know exactly how, the apostles and the prophets and the elders and the pastors, we don't know exactly how they worked all of that out in the first century. We don't have to know because, number one, that was a transition period between Judaism and Christianity. And also because we don't have to follow any specific pattern from 2,000 years ago. We are free in Jesus to do in principle the same things that they did, but we don't have to do it the exact same way that they did it. For example, you look at 1 Corinthians 14, where Paul gives a lot of instruction about assembling. And the Corinthians were just messing it up. I mean, they were not assembling for good. It was not accomplishing any good. And if they had been acting like Christians and acting like mature adults, there's no reason to believe Paul would have even written those instructions. But he had to write those instructions because they were acting incorrectly, and their assemblies were doing more harm than good. So he wrote to them, and he gives them some principles. And if you read in 1 Corinthians 14, there are things that they had that we don't have today, and we have things that they didn't have. For example, we have a Bible. We have a New Testament, 27 books to guide us, a book of principles to guide us in all phases of life and church work. But he says repeatedly to them, you can see the principle. If you just read the chapter, he continually tells them, let all things be done for edification. This doesn't edify. Don't do it this way. God's not the author of confusion, but of peace. So you can see that even though there were specific problems the Corinthians had, that he dealt with, that it would be a terrible mistake to take everything that he says and apply it for all time when he's talking to a particular church in the first century and problems that they had. You can clearly see the principles. The principle is that the assemblies are supposed to edify. What does the word edify mean? It means to build up. It means to encourage people in the faith. The point of assembling together is to edify and encourage and help people stay focused on Jesus. Hebrews 10:25, the verse everybody loves to quote about going to church, is just simply talking about Christians meeting together and considering one another in order to, and he even uses the word stir up love and good works. Considering each other, that's the purpose of assembling. You think about your brothers and sisters, and they're thinking about you, and it's a way to make sure that you stay encouraged to live for the Lord. That's the purpose of the assembly. It is not a formal church service that you have to go sit through for an hour and go through these prescribed rituals under the oversight of men who look at church like a business. And you don't have to have anything to do with any of that, because that is all man-made. Now, if you're functioning and focusing on Jesus, and I'm not trying to tell you that it's sinful to be a part of those groups, because I can't say that, because the New Testament is not that kind of system. There is no one particular way to do it. But I am telling you that in a lot of cases, a much better way is to, especially for a lot of people who that approach just doesn't appeal to you. It doesn't help you. Get away from it and take a simple approach to assembling, and just meet together and encourage each other and pray together. Somebody says, what would you do in a home church? What do you mean, what would you do in a home church? You would love the Lord Jesus Christ. You would talk about him. Two Christians meeting together to encourage each other in the Christian life. What would you do? Well, you'd read the Word. You would pray. You would probably maybe sing some songs to him. Worshiping him is certainly a part of the Christian life, and that's certainly something that's fun to do together when the emphasis is on him. But the point is, there are no set guidelines. There's principles that we are to follow. So if you were to, people have said, well, I just can't find a church that I fit in with in my town or in my community or within driving distance or whatever. So I tell them, start one. And people think, well, you can't just start a church. Why? Yes, you can. You can start a congregation of the church that Jesus built, because it's simple. It's just simple fellowship, meeting together. So meet together, and you say, what do we do? Do whatever you want to do that is within the bounds of Christianity. Now that you know what's right and what's wrong and what's sinful and what's not, but do things that edify and encourage you in your relationship with Christ. You're always welcome to email me. I'll give you some ideas, because I've started a home group before. And it's really not that complicated at all. And if you ever email me and don't hear back from me in a reasonable amount of time, email me again, because we get a lot of emails that it might have been accidentally overlooked. I'm never intentionally ignoring you. But anyway, it's something to give some thought to, because if that's something that's on your heart to do, you say, man, I would like to start a church, but I don't know how to do that. You do know how to do that. You know how to meet with another believer, and more than one is great if you get 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 together, and just focus on Jesus and love Jesus. So what if we grow? Then what do we do? Then we're going to wind up like these denominations. That's the people who always try to defend the denominational approach and say that's the way it has to be done in our culture. They say because if you grow, you're eventually going to have a building and you're going to have organization. No, that's not true. What you do is if you get too big for the home, for any one home group, what you do is you go start another one. Do what the apostles did. You go start another group, okay? And you're train people to walk with the Lord. And as you grow and mature, then you develop leaders. And what do those leaders do? They're not there to make laws for God and to dominate people's faith. They're there to help people grow in their relationship with Christ. So then you develop leaders and go start another home group. And then when that one gets too big, start another home group. You see, there doesn't have to be a mega church. Now, that can be one way to do it in this culture. I've seen it done correctly, and I've seen it done incorrectly far more. But it doesn't have to be done that way. You can have a movement of small groups, house churches, and they don't even have to meet in houses. You know, somebody may own a store that you can use. I knew a lady that had a restaurant, and on Sundays her restaurant was closed, and she had a church that met there. So anyway, there's all sorts of avenues open to you to do things. What you need to understand is how free you are in Jesus to follow him and to think outside of these man-made boxes, outside of these man-made walls. That's what people don't want you to understand, is how simple and how freeing the gospel of Christ is. Focus on Jesus. Help others focus on Jesus. And yes, you should be meeting with other believers, not just for your benefit, but for their benefit, encouraging them. But those meetings do not have to be large. They don't have to be in church buildings. They can be anywhere, and they can be very, very simple. If I didn't think the Bible backed that up 100%, then of course I wouldn't say it. So, but if you've read the New Testament, especially the book of Acts, then you certainly know that this was a very simple approach. It was not a denominational approach that you read about in the New Testament. Anyway, we thank you for your time, and always for joining us here on YouTube on our podcast. We also got the videos on TikTok, and if they are blessing you, we are so thankful to God for that. So honored to be a part of your walk with the Lord Jesus Christ, and we'll see you next time.